So today we're talking about for sale by owners. At Sterling Real Estate Partners, we are agents who look into the market, not just what's on MLS and the multiple listing service that we're provided for by other agents. We actually go out in the field and look for sale by owners. And we wanted today to talk a little bit about for sale by owner information, advice, maybe some things that for sale by owners might want to think about and consider from a real estate standpoint. And of course, we're always happy to list your home and help you sell it. And we want to encourage you to think about what we're going to bring up today as a way to often consider putting your home on the market. And some of those things are whether the price point that you're getting is the best price point, whether your best interests are at heart when it comes to selling them, because a lot of times we don't understand the fact that it's also an emotional transaction when we're selling our own home, and that a real estate agent becomes a buffer for you when you get into the negotiating process and you think that some of the upgrades you've done or some of the things you've done are very important, but that they don't have the same value to the buyer that they do to you as the seller. So we're going to touch on some points that today like that. And I've got some great agents with me today. We're all brokers in Sterling Real Estate Partners, and we're going to talk about it together. So I'd like to start with Carl. Carl, when you work with or for sale by owner come in contact with them, what would be some of your best advice?
Well, my strategy with for sale by owners is a little different than a lot of agents because I don't spend much time trying to get the listing. I try to provide a buyer, and I'm perfectly happy if I've found the right house for my buyer. I'm perfectly happy to do both sides of the transaction and just have an unrepresented seller, and I'm fine with that. I think sometimes you can waste a lot of time trying to get a listing when you could get the equivalent compensation by having a buyer and being willing to include the for sale by owners as available properties, especially at a time like this where the inventory on the MLS is ridiculously low and to some extent very overpriced. So it might turn out for your buyers that the best thing you can do is show them a for sale by owner.
Absolutely. And so when working with for sale by owners, we just want to make sure that they are protecting our side of an agreed commission, whatever that is, because when we work together and represent a buyer, not only have we procured the buyer, we've done a lot of work vetting them and making sure they're qualified. And sometimes for sale by owners don't have the luxury of qualifying a buyer. Jonathan, can you talk about why having a buyer is important, a buyer vetted is important for sale by owner?
Well, a lot of the times the for sale by owners start the process and they get overwhelmed by the amount of response to their listing. They can be taking phone calls and emails from all over the place. Before you start bringing everybody into your house, you have to understand when an agent brings a prospective buyer into your house, typically they've already been pre-qualified and they're ahead of the game in terms of whether or not they can even purchase your home. So that's always one of the first steps that we suggest anybody that's really wants to work for sale by owner, start considering the ways that you want to engage the public that engages your listing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good information. And a lot of times being overwhelmed by the response doesn't always mean it's priced correctly or that the people are going to pay what you're asking. And when you're for sale by owner, you have to be a little bit more aware of what the market will bear, as far as pricing. What would you say, Jeff, is some of your experience with pricing and for sale by owners?
Well, a lot of times when I see a sign, I'm walking around, walking neighborhoods, I'll either see somebody outside and ask them questions about their house, ask them about the pricing, how did they arrive at it, what's going on, how long it's been on the market, and just what their overall strategies are. If I have a buyer who would be interested in, then I'll mention that to them and we'll take a tour. Or I'll go in and look around first and maybe do a video if they're open to that. Sometimes frankly, it's like, how long are you going to do this? And at some point, you're going to get tired of all the action going through there. You're going to get sick of it. But they'll stick at it oftentimes, and then when they do get tired, that's good. When they do get a little bit tired of it, then we converse further, and then they may want to list it with me. So
Absolutely.
those are the basics.
And what value do we as real estate agents bring to the for sale by owner individual, the person that's selling their home? Can you talk a little bit about that, Mike? What do you bring as value? I mean, I think we're all valuable and we all have lots of value. So this is a setup question, but what, Mike, do you feel like is one of the benefits that you can bring to a for sale by owner if you represent the buyer?
Well, once we've engaged with the seller, a lot of times the real estate agent is the fabric that's holding the transaction together. A lot of times in the for sale by owner situation, the seller isn't actually completely ready to sell the home. They don't have everything lined up to actually be able to perform. Sometimes there are liens on the home. Sometimes there are other things that are in the way that have to be worked out before. That generally, if you'd hired an agent, would have been taken care of before engaging in with the public and everything. So we're kind of the glue that keeps those types of transactions together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do we know, I know from the National Association of Realtors that a lot of times buyers or sellers are pricing their home at a price point they think is actually what it's worth based on the upgrades that they've done or some of the changes they've made or the neighborhood. But they don't have up-to-date information, and we can provide that for them. So Charlotte, tell me a little bit about the buying process. I know you've shown a for sale by owner and had an experience, but I know there's some intricacies of funding and what the bank may require. Can you talk a little bit about something you found?
Well, yeah, I mean, with the particular buyers I was working with, they had been pre-qualified already. So we had already been through those stages and had pre-qualification letter, showing what they were approved for. So we knew the price point that we were looking in. And when these particular buyers found this listing, they found it on Zillow. It wasn't even listed in the MLS. So when they told me about it, I kind of had to do a little Googling myself to find the listing. And I found that this particular listing had been on the market for 291 days, according to Zillow's listing. And one of the things that I read directly in the seller's comments was that the home was priced well below, what the upgrades cost. And I think a lot of sellers, they put their own personal emotions into pricing that home. And that's part of what, we as agents are there to kind of be that buffer because we do know the market values. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Jolene, but in terms of financing, that's what I've seen from a buyer's perspective.
Absolutely. And that's interesting information. We know from Zillow that pricing is based on an algorithm, and it's not always an accurate view of pricing. But the bank requires sometimes certain things like an RPD, a residential property disclosure, from the for sale by owners, and they don't always know that. So that's one of the other avenues we can help in. But you had mentioned something about the VA loan. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in North Carolina, 90% of owner-occupied homes are VA loans. And so in a situation with a for sale by owner, a lot of the times the reason the seller decides not to, hire a listing agent is because they want to save that percentage of commission. And typically the way commissions work in North Carolina is it can be anywhere between that percentage is usually a percentage of the total sale price of the home, and it's split between the buyer agent and the seller's agent. So typically you just on average anywhere and the buying side. So if a seller says they're not going to pay commission at all, and that's listed right there on their Zillow, ad or whatever, they are automatically cutting out that 90% of the market, because most of those VA buyers are going to be represented by an agent. And the VA, the Veterans Administration, has certain restrictions on loans saying, you know, who will pay that seller that commission, and it's not the buyer.
Mm-hmm. So those are things for people to think about, is that if you have, as a for sale by owner, a lot of buyers already hired agents because in their minds, the agent is their protection. And for sale by owner will often say, I'm saving money, whatever that number is that they've decided. But Jane, you have some insight on paying that that commission to an agent. What would be your advice?
You know, it is very tempting for all of us before we ever got into real estate to say, this can't be that tough. I can sell this home myself. However, when we have people who are thinking that, ask yourself, do I have an ability to negotiate with a buyer? When I realized all of the work that I've done in this house and I want to recover that, do I really have that ability to do that? Who is going to pay the costs? Who will write that offer to purchase? Am I going to be upset if someone offers something to me that I don't think is fair? And asking myself, do I know how to present my home to the public? Do I know how to depersonalize it? All of those questions are those that I would ask myself before I ever consider putting my house on the market. And I think ultimately, when you ask yourself those questions honestly, I think your answer to yourself would be, I need help. Ask for that help from someone who can give you those good answers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the value of selling a home is having the knowledge, having someone come into your home. We talked about this, getting your home ready to sell in our last call. We gave some great advice on how to get your home ready. And for sale by owners don't always have that same advantage. I know a lot of times I'll look at pictures online, and Jonathan, you can talk about this as one of our photographer agents, but I see the pictures and they're not really very appealing. And that's where most people start their home search, is online. So Jonathan, talk a little bit about what you've seen in the pictures, maybe from your experience with for sale by owners, and what would be the advice that you would give them?
Well, overall, most of the picture quality is going to be not at the professional level. That's going to impact the exposure. Also, not listing it with an agent and not having it spread across the largest market you can is going to hurt the ability to maximize the return on the largest investment of your life. So if you are going to list it on your own, that's fine and it can work, but make sure that you have professional level marketing and all the other different aspects of the transaction that we help manage. They need to be put in focus before you ever present it to the public.
Absolutely. And we all know that you only really get one first impression in life, whether you're meeting somebody or somebody seeing your home. Jeff, what would be that first piece of advice that you give a for sale by owner that you would want them to know about, from your experience?
On a for sale by owner, I would say they have to keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of traffic, a lot of questions, a lot of things coming just at them in a big barrage.
Right.
And you've heard some of it before. Jonathan mentioned good photography, good pictures. A lot of them are blacked out, or they're showing their great shower curtain or something like that may not be the most appealing for some people. There's going to be a certain time of, I would call it endurance. How much endurance do they have to be able to field the questions, get people in there? And then once they get into the negotiations in general, it's like, what's required? What forms? What else do they need to fill out? What are the various options? Because a lot of times a buyer's coming at them and saying, after an inspection, we need to do this and that and that and that. And with not a lot of experience in some of those repairs or requests, you don't know how legitimate those are, how solid they are, and where do you go from that point?
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
a big open issue.
That's a great point about the reading an inspection report can be like reading, a regulation book. You don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you can get an inspection report from a buyer's agent and a buyer and then not know what you need to prioritize or how much you need to spend. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it too? Because Jeff brought up a very good point. I'd love for your follow-up on that.
Well, the inspector's report is always pretty difficult to stomach as the seller when you see things that are wrong with the home that you've been occupying and everything. But when a buyer presents and asks on an inspection report they've had on the home, really the toughest thing is to determine what you're willing to, I guess, concede for their use of the home in the future. So if they say that the roof in the home is in need of repair or replacement, you have to determine what you're willing to, how long of the life you're willing to compensate them for when you make an offer in the negotiation process.
Right. So Carl, when you've represented a for sale by owner, you've represented a buyer, you have seen the benefits for closing for a for sale by owner. What advice would you give?
Well, I think what I always do first, just because the world is changing minute by minute these days, but one of the things when I call a for sale by owner and say I have a buyer, they're interested in your house, I'd like to show them the house, but I need you to sign an unrepresented owner form where you're acknowledging that I'm not going to be representing you, I'm going to be representing my buyer. And in a lot of cases, my experience has been the for sale by owners to the buyer's agent, but they're not, they don't put the same value on the be paying if they were to hire a listing agent to do all of the heavy lifting for them. So I just try to get the paperwork done up front, because you don't want to have your buyer all excited about the house and the seller all excited, and then no paperwork to conclude the transaction. So I just get them to sign that form and agree to pay the.
And we'd like to say that there is no fixed percent. The commissions are all over the place, and we don't, we'll work with a for sale by owner. So we just know that whatever that agreed amount is, we want everything in writing so that there's protection for both the buyer and the seller. So that's important, is the paperwork and making sure that everybody understands who's being represented and what the representation is from our standpoint legally, because we're guided by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And I would say that's probably one of the most important points, is that we actually have a governing body overlying and overseeing what we do. So when we're working with unrepresented sellers or for sale by owners, our protection is extended to the integrity for which we do our jobs, because we are regulated. So they're already going to have a second layer of protection, the for sale by owner and the buyer. I think the for sale by owner wants to be sure that the person's vetted, but they also want to know that the integrity of the deal is there. And that's what we provide as agents, because of the governing body we answer to, and obviously because of the ethics for which we are all sworn to abide by. So there are a lot of advantages of working with a buyer's agent if you stay for sale by owner. But when you list with that, with an agent, I want to make sure people understand for sale by owners, when they list with us, do they pay anything when we list? And it's, that's important to let people know that. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened here. Whoop. Sorry, are you there?
We're here.
Yes.
Okay, it just took me off. I'm so sorry. Anyway, we just want to make sure that people understand that when we're listing a property, we take on the responsibility of getting the pictures taken, making sure we're pricing it properly, and then we only get paid when we're successful at selling the listing. So that's really important information that a lot of people don't know. And so we want to make sure we emphasize that as well. So, all right, go ahead.
I like Carl referring to the heavy lifting part of it.
Yes.
The what many people don't realize is that heavy lifting is really the emotional piece of this.
Right.
And when we are proud of our homes, and it's absolutely the heaviest lifting is the emotional piece of this. From the very beginning and talking to people about their personal items, down to the negotiating and who pays for what and what am I going to fix and what am I not going to fix. That is really, really the greatest value.
Fantastic. That's very, very good advice. Charlotte, do you have anything you'd like to add before we wrap up our call today?
We talked about there being a lot of paperwork with a home sale. I mean, there's a whole mountainous list of things that we, have to make sure as selling agents that we have in order. And as a for sale by owner, you would have to have all those things in order too, unless you just expect, I guess, your, closing attorney to kind of do the heavy lifting for you there. But there's a mineral oil gas rights paperwork, there's residential property disclosures, there's lead-based paint disclosures, there's, of course, checking the mortgage pre-approval of your buyers. There's inspections that you have to go through, and typically a buyer's agent would be present for those, inspections, and possibly even the seller's agent would be present for those inspections to kind of be the buffer. There's HUD disclosures, there's appraisals and surveys. So those are all things that for sale by owners have to think about, and you don't want to get yourself in a legal, predicament by not having those things in order. Even just the offer to purchase is super complicated with the wording. And those are all things that real estate agents have been, trained and schooled on.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, and before we wrap up, if anyone else has anything, just jump in. We cover quite a bit. I appreciate the team that we are. We all work under the same banner of Sterling Real Estate Partners. We all work independently from the company as well, meaning that we do our own businesses in different areas, but you are welcome to reach out to any of us to ask questions about a for sale by owner. And maybe more of the details are, what each of us provides. And then our level of service is by far the highest out there. And we will obviously work with you where you're at. So just make sure you give us a call if you are for sale by owner also and want us to know about your property. It wouldn't hurt for you to send us an email at all at sterlingrealestatepartners.com. And I'll put that up on the screen as we end this call today. But we just want to let you know that we aren't fickle about real estate, meaning we don't have to have the perfect scenario in order to get the deal done. That's what we do. We help get things to the finish line, and we want to make sure that our interests lie in doing an integrous business, working ethically with each party, and then making sure that the most expensive purchase most people will make in their life is protected by the highest level of professionalism. So that's why we're doing this, but we also want you to know we're human beings. And so we're in our homes and we're showing you a little bit of who we are. And so we want to thank you for joining us today. And we want to let everybody know that Sterling Real Estate Partners is a local firm. We keep our money in the mountains, meaning that everything we do in our business goes back into our communities where we live. We don't send them to big corporate offices in other states. So we're really invested in this market and we're very familiar with this market, but we're also willing to help anyone who's selling their home today by giving them information free of charge and obviously being there to support them, which is the best service you're going to get. And you won't even want to know what the commission is because you'll be so pleased with our service, it won't matter. So thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Bravo, good girl, Jolene.
And thanks so much for sharing your homes and your opinions and obviously your professionalism. I'm thrilled to work with all of you, and we'll be posting this video very soon, and hopefully you're watching it and calling us right now. Thank you so much, everyone.